The morning sun rose over the presidential palace in Ouagadougou as Ibrahim Traoré reviewed security briefings. His aide, Aminata, entered urgently with a golden-lettered invitation. It was from a global news network, inviting him to debate Charlie Kirk on African leadership and Western relations. Kirk, a U.S. conservative known for dismissing African leaders, had millions of followers and often claimed Africa needed Western intervention. Traoré knew this was risky. Western media often twisted African leaders' words. Yet he recalled his grandfather's wisdom that truth spoken with courage could shake empires. Smiling, Traoré instructed Aminata to prepare the communications team. If Kirk wanted a debate, he would accept. This was not just a challenge but an opportunity for Africa's voice. The palace war room soon filled with his advisors, ready to gather evidence of Western exploitation. Minister of Information Bukari Ouedraogo prepared folders of past colonial communications, while young researcher Kadatu Kabor displayed Charlie Kirk's most inflammatory posts reducing Africa to corruption and incompetence. The team understood this was more than a debate. It was a fight against generations of Western narrative control. Dr. Sanogo reminded them of debt traps, imposed trade deals, and forced privatizations that crippled African economies. Realities Kirk ignored. Documents revealed how French corporations extracted billions from Burkina Faso's mines, while World Bank and Western diplomats forced unfair agreements, later blaming Africans for the consequences. Through the night, the team built a damning case, a record of systematic exploitation masked as help. By dawn, Traoré stood before a wall of evidence, allies across Africa sending more proof. The truth was ready. Now it had to be delivered in a way Western media couldn't bury. The next morning in London, his convoy pulled up to the global news network headquarters. Traoré wore a sharp suit with kente cloth, carrying a briefcase of evidence. Inside, producers prepared for what they assumed would be Kirk's easy victory. But Traoré knew the narrative was about to change forever. Studio whispers mocked Traoré, with betting pools on how quickly Charlie Kirk would humiliate him. Executives anticipated viral clips of another dictator from the Dark Continent being dismantled, while camera crews prepared like hunters eager to capture Africa's supposed incompetence. No one had bothered to learn who Traoré really was. When he entered the lobby, his quiet authority silenced the room. Receptionists froze, interns Googled his name, and even skeptics felt the weight of his presence. In the elevator, aides gave last-minute updates as handlers assumed this would be an easy show. But Traoré walked forward like a man entering history. Inside the studio, Kirk paced confidently while his team prepared victory posts. Producers expected his triumph. Yet as Traoré set down his briefcase of evidence and faced his opponent, the air shifted. The stage was ready, the cameras rolled, and the world was about to witness a reckoning Western media had never imagined. Kirk basked in applause from a hand-picked audience, radiating confidence as he prepared for what he thought would be another easy victory. He launched into his attack, accusing African leaders of corruption, incompetence, and dependency on Western aid, his polished delivery feeding the crowd's prejudices. The moderator turned to Traoré, clearly expecting defensive anger and humiliation. Instead, Traoré sat calm and unshaken, his presence steady as stone. Smiling, he began, "Your opening statement reveals more about your ignorance than African leadership." The studio fell quiet. With deliberate calm, he clicked open his briefcase, the sound echoing like a crack in a dam. The first document emerged under the bright lights, a contract signed by the French Treasury and Burkina Faso's former colonial rulers. Kirk's grin faltered. The audience leaned in. The narrative they expected was collapsing, and something unprecedented was about to begin. The cameras zoomed in as Traoré revealed how the CFA franc tied 14 African nations to Paris, forcing them to deposit half their reserves in the French treasury. Silence fell as viewers worldwide Googled what they had never been told. Kirk's confidence faltered. Then came bank records and intercepted communications showing Western corporations bribing African leaders for mining rights, extracting billions while leaving devastation behind. Email leaks exposed European executives casually plotting payments and political pressure. World Bank memos showed how Africa was forced to privatize water and cut food subsidies, creating poverty later blamed on African incompetence. Diplomatic cables confirmed Western governments undermining leaders who resisted unfair trade deals. Kirk's dismissals rang hollow against official seals and signatures. Document after document spread across Traoré's podium like captured war plans. The audience shifted from smug certainty to stunned silence. Kirk's rapid-fire delivery broke into stammering fragments. Sweat glistened under the lights as producers panicked behind the cameras. His smirk vanished, replaced by the look of a man watching his worldview collapse. The final blow came when Traoré produced records showing Kirk's own think tank funded by corporations profiting from African exploitation. The revelation crushed what little credibility remained. By the time the moderator tried to rescue him, Kirk had devolved into angry sputters about bias and propaganda. The audience knew the truth. The narrative had turned. Kirk's face flushed with rage as millions watched his composure collapse in real time. The pundit who built a career dismissing African voices was being dismantled by the leader he had underestimated. Social media lit up with reactions while his team scrambled in vain for damage control. In less than 30 minutes, the predator had become prey. Desperate, Kirk lashed out, "You're just another African dictator blaming the West for your failures." But the insult fell flat against the mountain of evidence already exposed. Cameras caught his shaking hands and faltering voice, a meltdown of Western arrogance broadcast worldwide. Traoré leaned forward, calm and precise. "Mr. Kirk, you call me a dictator, yet your government has killed more African leaders in 50 years than malaria." The studio froze. Kirk gasped like a fish out of water as Traoré added, "Unlike you, I was elected by my people, not appointed by corporate donors." The audience erupted. Social media crashed under the flood of shares and clips, the moment immortalized in screenshots of Kirk's defeat. Traoré's receipts trended globally as the world witnessed history, an African leader shattering a Western narrative live on air. Kirk's supporters scrambled to spin the moment, but their efforts drowned under the tidal wave of Traoré's receipts going viral. Young Africans across the diaspora posted celebration videos, finally watching their continent's dignity defended with evidence too solid to dismiss. Newsrooms rushed to fact-check, only to confirm every document's authenticity. What began as entertainment had become a historical reckoning. Kirk's career collapsed in minutes, his hollow stare broadcast across continents. The control room buzzed with panic as advertisers, executives, and political operatives called in, demanding to know how their carefully crafted narrative had been dismantled by a man they dismissed as an easy target. Servers buckled under unprecedented traffic. International networks cut into regular programming, while academics scrambled to contextualize evidence long buried in plain sight. For the first time, Western media was forced to confront its complicity in propaganda. Across Africa, the moment ignited celebrations. In Accra, crowds filled Independence Square cheering around glowing phone screens. In Nairobi, students projected the debate on dorm walls, dissecting every document. From Cairo to Cape Town, millions saw their grievances validated. The African Union buzzed with diplomats praising Traoré, while reviewing their own archives for proof of interference. In Kinshasa, headlines shouted, "The day truth won." Meanwhile, European media scrambled. The BBC convened emergency meetings. French outlets explained the CFA franc to shocked audiences, and German papers confronted revelations of their corporations' roles in Africa's underdevelopment. What was meant to humiliate an African leader instead became a turning point in history. The night truth broke the wall of Western narratives. The European Parliament demanded probes into the corporate government networks that had drained African wealth, while universities across Europe rushed to revise African studies programs built on imperial nostalgia. The intellectual scaffolding that justified exploitation was crumbling in real time. In Washington, Kirk's humiliation ignited political chaos. Conservative think tanks came under fire for their funding sources, Democrats pounced on Republican hypocrisy, and progressives used Traoré's evidence to challenge the entire foreign aid model. Universities announced urgent panels, finally giving African studies departments the platform they had long been denied. The State Department issued cautious statements about renewed partnership, thinly veiled panic at strategies suddenly exposed. The fallout spread further. The World Bank faced outrage over structural adjustment programs that enriched corporations while devastating African economies. UN officials admitted behind closed doors that many of their projects had fostered dependency rather than independence. Trade negotiators found African counterparts newly armed with history that made pressure tactics toxic. Global media corporations confronted the uncomfortable truth. Their coverage had been shaped by advertisers, not facts. By nightfall, the world could no longer plead ignorance. Archives once ignored were now viral proof of exploitation. And Kirk, once a rising star, saw his empire collapse within days. Sponsors fled, donors distanced themselves, his radio show bled advertisers, and universities canceled his speaking tours. The man who mocked African dignity had become a global meme for intellectual defeat. Event organizers quietly canceled Kirk's appearances, fearing protests. His think tank placed him on indefinite leave, and even his most loyal followers began questioning the ideology he had sold them. Damage control interviews backfired, each one producing new viral clips of his inability to counter Traoré's evidence. Fox News dropped his segment. Conferences rewrote programs, and publishers walked away from book deals. By the end, Kirk had become a cautionary tale, an influencer undone by ignorance in an age where receipts ruled. Meanwhile, Traoré's profile soared. Invitations from universities and think tanks poured in, his social media following exploded, and publishing houses fought over his memoirs. Professors assigned the debate as required viewing, while his speaking fees skyrocketed. For the first time in generations, an African leader became a symbol of intellectual integrity in Western media. The ripple effects were seismic. News outlets hired African journalists, universities launched new research into long-ignored exploitation, and development organizations faced tough questions about their failures. A new standard emerged. Africa would no longer accept narratives without evidence. 6 months later, African universities saw record enrollments in political science and international relations. Debate clubs across the continent taught the Traoré method, meticulous research paired with calm delivery. At the UN, African diplomats arrived armed with documentation, transforming discussions from Western monologues into true dialogues. The African Union launched a Continental Truth Commission, institutionalizing the power of evidence. What began as a debate had become something larger, a global shift in how truth confronted power. Young African entrepreneurs launched media platforms to counter Western narratives with fact-driven, African-owned storytelling. The debate had awakened a continent to the power of organized truth-telling. Traoré's dismantling of Kirk became a global masterclass in how preparation and authenticity could overpower performative ignorance. Universities worldwide revised their African studies programs, while publishers created new imprints for African scholarship. Donors began demanding evidence-based development models, forcing NGOs and European governments to renegotiate trade and aid on more equal terms. The World Bank announced reforms under pressure from activists wielding Traoré's receipts. Corporations scrambled as consumers and shareholders demanded transparency. Mining giants faced lawsuits. France's CFA franc system came under parliamentary attack, and American think tanks lost funding as their expertise was exposed as corporate propaganda. News outlets hired African bureau chiefs, replacing parachute reporting with authentic voices. For the first time, Africa was not a subject of analysis, but the author of its own narrative. By the debate's first anniversary, textbooks worldwide framed it as a watershed moment when African voices broke centuries of silence. The briefcase that toppled Kirk sat in Burkina Faso's National Museum, a symbol of dignity weaponized through evidence. Children learned of the day their continent's honor was defended. Students studied it as proof that preparation and moral courage can reshape global power. Traoré's victory had become more than a takedown. It was the moment truth shattered propaganda, forever changing how Africa was seen and how it saw itself.